I had kept the secret for 14 months. I had sat at family dinners, answered questions about my retirement, accepted my daughter-in-law's thinly veiled condescension about my modest lifestyle, and said nothing. Then a woman I had never met before sat down at my Easter table, looked at me across the glazed ham, and asked about the $10 million royalty check. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my own home. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. I am Mr. ZAHA, and I am 68 years old. I want to start with a simple truth, one that took me longer than it should have to fully accept, and that truth is this. People see what they expect to see. They look at a 68-year-old man in a modest house in Knoxville, Tennessee, wearing unremarkable clothes, driving a 6-year-old Ford pickup, and they construct a story about him that requires no further investigation. The story writes itself. Retired. Comfortable enough. Probably some savings. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing worth paying close attention to. I have spent the past 14 months allowing people to believe that story. Not because I am a deceptive man. I am not, and I will get to the specifics of what I am in due course. But because the alternative, which was to correct the story, would have required conversations I was not ready to have. Conversations about money and intention and the specific, clarifying uses of restraint. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am, and then I will tell you about the Easter dinner that changed everything. My name is ZAHA, and I spent 31 years as a software engineer. Not the glamorous kind, not a Silicon Valley founder, not a man who disrupted anything, not a TED Talk. I was a working engineer, the kind who solves specific, unglamorous problems and does it quietly and competently for decades. I worked for 4 different companies over my career, the last of which was a mid-size enterprise software company in Knoxville where I was employed as a senior engineer for the final 19 years before my retirement at 65. During those 19 years, I built things. Systems, processes, internal tools. I was good at my work in the way that people are good at things they genuinely love, with an attention and a patience that produced results that held up over time. And in the last decade of my career, I built something specific, a software solution for a particular problem in industrial logistics that my employer had been trying to solve for years. I solved it, not alone. I had a small team, 2 brilliant younger engineers who deserve more credit than they generally receive in the telling of this story, but I was the primary architect. The company filed for the patent in my name, as they were required to under the terms of my employment agreement. Standard procedure. What was not standard, what I had negotiated with a combination of stubbornness and the accumulated leverage of 19 years of reliable, excellent work, was a royalty clause. A percentage of all revenue generated by or licensed from the solution for the life of the patent. I negotiated this in 2009, at a moment when the company's leadership considered it a generous but manageable concession, a way to retain a valuable engineer without the cost of equity. What they did not fully anticipate, and what I had reason to believe based on my own assessment of the market, was how the solution would perform. It performed very well. Over the 14 years between the patent filing and my retirement, the royalty payments had been modest, meaningful supplements to my salary, filed quietly with my accountant, not discussed with anyone except my late wife, Carol, who had died 6 years ago and whose advice I still sometimes sought in the form of extended one-sided conversations with her photograph in the study. Then, 14 months ago, the company's logistics solution was licensed to a consortium of 3 major industrial manufacturers on a 15-year agreement. The terms of the license were, by any standard, significant. And under my royalty clause, my percentage of that license generated a single payment of $10,200,000. I deposited it. I called my financial advisor, a meticulous woman named Patricia Cole who had managed my portfolio for 12 years and who received the news with a professional calm that I found deeply reassuring. I met with my estate attorney, Howard Briggs, to review and update my documents. I made 3 charitable donations, to Carol's Hospice, to the Engineering Scholarship Fund at the University of Tennessee where I had gotten my degree, and to a children's hospital in Knoxville that Carol had supported for years. And then I went back to my life. The Ford pickup, the modest house, The Tuesday card game with 3 men I had been friends with since the Carter administration. The weekend walks along the river. The slow, considered, deliberately uncomplicated life of a man who has what he needs and is not confused about what that means. I told no one in my family. I need to explain this, because it is the heart of the story. My son Lucas is 38 years old. He is a regional sales manager for a medical device company. A good job, well compensated, a career he is legitimately good at. He is charming and capable and has, since his mother's death, been the kind of son who calls on Sundays and shows up for the major holidays and genuinely believes he is present in my life. He loves me. I do not doubt this. But he loves me in the way that busy, successful people love their aging parents, with good intentions, intermittent attention, and a set of assumptions that have never been seriously interrogated. Lucas married Leslie 4 years ago. Leslie Harmon ZAHA is 34 years old, attractive, professionally ambitious, and possessed of an intelligence that she has never entirely been able to deploy without it tipping into something that uses people as measurements. She is a marketing director at a healthcare company, makes good money, drives a very expensive car, and has, from the first Thanksgiving she attended as Lucas's girlfriend, treated my house in Knoxville with the specific courtesy that people extend to places they find inadequate. I do not dislike Leslie. I want to be precise about that. She is not a villain. She is a woman who values certain things: status, visible success, the legible markers of a life that is moving in the right direction, and who has made the entirely human error of arranging the people in her life according to those values. On that scale, I was not particularly impressive. Retired engineer. Modest house. Drives a pickup. Shops at the regular grocery store. Not a man who generates social currency. She was kind to me in the way people are kind to furniture that has been in the family long enough to count as history. Pleasant, slightly careful, the warmth calibrated to the correct level for the occasion. I noticed. I said nothing. I had nothing to prove. What I had, sitting quietly in an account that Leslie did not know existed, was $10,200,000. Plus the ongoing royalty payments, which continued on the 15-year license, and which my financial advisor was managing with characteristic precision. I had not told Lucas because I was watching. I know that sounds calculated. Perhaps it was, slightly. But the truth is more complicated and less strategic than it sounds. The truth is that Carol was the person I would have told, that the first call after Patricia's would have been to Carol, that we would have sat together in the kitchen and talked through every implication and every decision and every person and what it meant for each of them. Carol was the one who knew how to translate an event into a relationship conversation. Without her, I was navigating by dead reckoning, and I needed time. Time turned into months. Months turned into 14 of them. And then it was Easter. Lucas had called 2 weeks before to say that Easter dinner would be at my house this year. Not a request, quite. More of a cheerful announcement. And that Leslie was bringing her friend Elizabeth, who was visiting from Nashville and would be in town for the holiday weekend. Lucas said Elizabeth was great. I'd love her. Very smart, very fun. I said of course, I'd be happy to have everyone. I bought the ham. I made Carol's deviled eggs, which took longer than they should because I still cannot separate a yolk as cleanly as she could, and I refused to accept this. I set the table, the good table, the dining room table that seated 8 and that I used perhaps 4 times a year. I put out the good china because it was Easter and Carol would have wanted it. I was in the kitchen basting the ham when Lucas and Leslie arrived, and behind them, a woman I had never met, in her early 30s, with the quick, curious eyes of someone who reads situations fast and finds them interesting. Elizabeth. She shook my hand in the foyer and said, "Mr. ZAHA, I've heard so much about you. Lucas talks about you all the time. Good things, I hope," I said. "Mostly," she said, and smiled in the way of someone who meant it as a joke, but also kind of didn't. I liked her immediately, which surprised me. I should have known, in hindsight, that a woman with those quick, curious eyes was not going to spend an entire Easter dinner accepting the surface version of things. Drop a comment below right now. Have you ever kept a secret from your family not to deceive them, but because you were watching and waiting? Tell me your thoughts, because what happened at that table is something I'm still processing, and the story is only just starting. Easter dinner started at 2 o'clock and was, for its first 40 minutes, a perfectly ordinary family meal. Lucas was in good spirits. He had closed a significant sales contract the week before, and had the energy of a man who is professionally validated and wants to share it. He told the story of the contract twice, once in summary and once in detail, and I listened both times with genuine interest because I am his father and his successes matter to me regardless of how many times they are narrated. Leslie was pleasant in the Easter Sunday register, more relaxed than she sometimes was. The glass of white wine she'd accepted when she arrived loosening something in her that was usually more carefully held. She had complimented the table setting, which I suspected was a genuine compliment and not a managed one. She had asked about the deviled eggs with what appeared to be real curiosity, and I had told her they were Carol's recipe, and she had said, "Lucas has told me those were his favorite thing every Easter growing up," and looked at me with something that was, briefly, genuinely, just warmth. Elizabeth was seated across from me, to my left, and she ate with the appreciation of someone for whom food is a legitimate pleasure rather than a social performance. She asked about the ham, specifically about the glaze, specifically about whether there was brown sugar involved and in what proportion, and we had a brief, satisfying conversation about the chemistry of glazing that I enjoyed more than most of the conversation I have in a month. "You cook a lot?" she asked. "More since I retired," I said. "I have time to do it properly now." "What did you do before?" "Software engineering," I said. 31 years. "Interesting," she said, in a tone that suggested she meant it. "What kind?" "Industrial logistics, mostly." The last stretch. Lucas jumped in from the other end of the table. Cheerfully, the way he jumps into conversations when he wants to be part of them. "Dad was the best engineer at his company for like 20 years. Total legend over there, right, Dad?" "I was competent," I said. "He's being modest," Lucas said to Elizabeth. "His team basically built the system that runs half the distribution infrastructure in the Mid-Atlantic region." I took a drink of water. Elizabeth was watching me with those quick eyes. Something had sharpened in them slightly. "Did you patent any of it?" she asked. It was a specific question, a technically informed question, not the kind that people ask casually, but the kind that people ask when they know enough about how the industry works to know that patents matter. "The company filed the primary patent," I said, which was accurate and also, technically, not the complete picture. "But with your name on it," she said. "That's standard," I said. "When the inventor is an employee." She nodded slowly, the nod of someone who is fitting pieces together. "I asked because I'm an IP attorney," she said. "Intellectual property. I work a lot with software patents and licensing agreements." The table did not go silent at this point. That came later. At this point, there was simply a small, significant shift in the quality of the conversation. The moment when a discussion that had been running on one track quietly changes rails. "That's interesting work," I said. "It's never boring," she agreed. "Especially lately. The licensing market for industrial logistics software has been..." She paused, tilted her head. "Actually, it's been extraordinary. There was a consortium deal that closed about 14 months ago. 3 major manufacturers, 15-year license on a logistics patent out of a Knoxville company. That made a lot of IP attorneys very aware of what was possible in that space." The glazed ham sat between us. I said. "The royalty structure on that deal," Elizabeth continued, in the pleasant, conversational tone of someone discussing weather, "was apparently very unusual. The inventor had negotiated a direct percentage, which almost never happens in employment-based patents. It requires either extraordinary leverage or an employer who significantly undervalued the upside." She picked up her fork. "The payout on the licensing deal, if I'm remembering the figures correctly from when it made the rounds in our professional circles, was somewhere in the range of $10 million. She looked at me. The table went silent. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was more like a wave. Lucas, who had been mid-sentence about something, stopped. Leslie, who had been reaching for the breadbasket, did not complete the reach. The silence arrived and settled like snow, quietly, completely, covering everything. Elizabeth was still looking at me. Her expression was not malicious. It was not designed to expose or embarrass. It was the expression of a woman who had been fitting pieces together for 40 minutes. The retired engineer in Knoxville, the industrial logistics specialty, the company, the patent, the timeline, and had arrived at a conclusion and was, in the honest and direct way of someone who has spent a career in facts, simply checking it. "The Kessler ZAHA patent," she said, gently, almost quietly. "That's yours, isn't it?" 14 months of silence. The deviled eggs. The 6-year-old pickup. The regular grocery store. The modest house that Leslie had been subtly finding inadequate for 4 years. All of it, sitting in this particular moment, waiting. I looked at Elizabeth across the Easter table. I looked at my son, whose face had gone through approximately 6 expressions in 4 seconds, and had settled on something between shock and a question he didn't know how to form. I looked at Leslie, whose hand had returned from the breadbasket and whose expression was the most unguarded I had ever seen it. Not the pleasantly managed face she generally offered, but something stripped of management entirely, something that was working very fast through very large information and had not yet reached a landing. I picked up my fork. "It is," I said. 1 word. 2 letters. And the table remained completely, absolutely, historically silent for what felt like a full minute, but was probably closer to 8 seconds. Then Lucas said, very quietly, "Dad." Not a question, not an accusation, just my name, in the voice of his 12-year-old self, the voice he used when he was trying to understand something large. "Why don't we finish dinner?" I said pleasantly, "and then we can talk." Elizabeth had the grace to look slightly abashed, the expression of someone who has, in the course of being professionally thorough, perhaps detonated something she hadn't fully calculated. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," I said. "It was going to come up eventually." I passed the green beans. "Have some more of these. The real butter makes a difference." She took the green beans. She smiled at me, a real smile, surprised and warm, the smile of someone who had just recalibrated their assessment of a person and found the result interesting. The dinner continued. On the surface, it continued. Forks moved. Wine was poured. Lucas managed to resume something like ordinary conversation, though his eyes came back to me every 45 seconds with the question he was waiting to ask. Leslie was quiet, not hostile, not wounded, simply processing, the way a very intelligent person processes a large, structural revision to their understanding of a situation. I ate my ham. I had another deviled egg. I thought about Carol, who would have found this moment deeply satisfying in the complicated way she found things satisfying, not because she wanted Leslie to feel small, but because she had always believed, quietly and firmly, that patience was its own form of power. "Patience, ZAHA," she would have said. "You've been patient. Now let it breathe." I let it breathe. When the pie was finished and the coffee was made and the plates were stacked and the late Easter afternoon was pressing its gold light through the dining room windows, I looked at my son. "Living room," I said. "All of us. Tell me your thoughts in the comments right now." When Elizabeth asked that question, what did you feel? Satisfaction? Discomfort? Both? Because what happened in that living room is the conversation that I had been building toward for 14 months without knowing it. Drop your thoughts below. The living room of my house in Knoxville is not a grand room. It has the dimensions of a man who bought a house for a family and never felt the need to upsize when the family grew up and moved out. 2 sofas, a reading chair that was Carol's and that I have never rearranged because I like knowing where she would have sat. A fireplace that I use from October through March. Bookshelves that cover 2 full walls and that Leslie had once, in the first year of her marriage to Lucas, described as cozy, in the tone people use when they mean cramped. The 4 of us settled into it. Lucas and Leslie on one sofa, Elizabeth in the armchair near the window that she had claimed with the instinctive spatial intelligence of someone who prefers a clear sight line, and me in the reading chair across from them. Carol's chair. It seemed appropriate. I let Lucas begin because he needed to. "Dad," he said, and then stopped, and then started again. "The patent. The royalty. You've how long?" "The royalty clause has been in place since 2009, I said. 14 months ago, he said. "The payment. 10,200,000, I said. "Yes." Lucas sat with this. He was not a man who sat with things often. He was a mover, a talker, a man who processed through action and conversation. But this required sitting, and he was doing it. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. This was the question I had been preparing for, in the various ways you prepare for a question you know is coming, for 14 months. I had several versions of the answer. I chose the most honest one. "Because I needed to know something first," I said. "And I couldn't know it if I told you." "What did you need to know?" I looked at my son, at the man he had become, genuinely good, capable, loving in the intermittent, distracted way of busy people who mean more than they demonstrate, and at the woman beside him, who was watching me now with the stillness of someone who suspects they are about to hear something that applies directly to them and is making herself ready. I needed to know how you treated me when you thought I had nothing, I said. When I was just your retired father in the modest house. When there was no financial reason to be attentive, no inheritance to position for, no resource to manage. I needed to see what that looked like. The room was very quiet. That sounds like a test, Lucas said carefully. It wasn't designed as one, I said. In the beginning, I just wasn't ready to tell anyone. Your mother was the person I told things to, and she was gone, and I needed time to figure out what to do with information that size without her. I paused. But as the months went on, and I watched, I noticed things. And the noticing became information I needed to have before I made any decisions about the future. Lucas looked at his hands. What did you notice? I was careful here. Not because I wanted to spare Leslie's feelings. I wanted to be honest with her, and honesty sometimes costs comfort. But because I wanted to be fair. To name what was real without embellishing it. I noticed, I said, that when you came to this house, Lucas, you came as a son visiting a father. With affection, with good intentions. I noticed that you called on Sundays and came at Thanksgiving and Christmas and now Easter, and that you were present in the way that good, busy sons are present. Lucas nodded slowly, hearing the distinction I was drawing. And I noticed, I continued, turning now to include Leslie fully in what I was saying, because she deserved to be addressed directly, that this house, and the life I live in it, was something that was tolerated rather than valued. Not cruelly. But, I watched you in this kitchen, Leslie, and I watched you in this living room, and I watched you at this table, and I knew that what you saw was a retired man in a modest house who represented your husband's history and your obligation. Leslie's expression was controlled but not closed. She was listening in the way of someone who is being held accountable and is deciding, in real time, how to receive it. I'm not saying that makes you a bad person, I said. It makes you someone who values certain things and read the visible information and drew a conclusion. The conclusion was reasonable based on what you could see. But it was wrong, she said quietly. It was incomplete, I said. Which is different. Elizabeth, who had been sitting in the window chair with the stillness of a professional who knows when to be a witness, shifted slightly. I glanced at her. I owe you an apology, she said to me. What I did at the table was, I made an assumption, I connected dots, and I asked a question in a context where I should have pulled you aside first. That was clumsy of me. It was also, I said, the thing that finally started the conversation. So I find it difficult to be entirely ungrateful. She held my gaze, and something moved between us, the particular understanding of two people who share an appreciation for how things actually work beneath their surfaces. How did you know? Lucas asked her. About the patent? It's a well-known deal in IP circles, she said. The consortium licensing agreement was unusual enough to be discussed extensively. The patent name, Kessler ZAHA, has two inventors. Your father is the ZAHA. Once I knew he was a retired software engineer from Knoxville who worked in industrial logistics. The rest wasn't difficult. Kessler, Lucas said, turning back to me. That's one of the engineers on your team. Marcus Kessler, I said. Yes. He was the second inventor. He received his share. He's been generous about what that's meant for his family. You've been sitting on $10 million for 14 months, Lucas said. Not accusatory. Still processing. In this house. In that truck. The truck is perfectly good, I said. Dad, I like the truck, I said. I liked it before October of 2 years ago, and I like it now. The money didn't change what I like. Lucas looked at me for a long moment, and then something happened on his face that I had not seen in years. Not since he was young. Not since the particular expression of a child who has suddenly understood that his parent is a person. A full person. With interior depths that parental love had obscured from view. I haven't been paying enough attention, he said. Quietly. To himself as much as to me. No, I agreed. You haven't. What does that mean for? What are you going to do with it? What do you want? That's a larger conversation, I said. And it's one I want to have with you seriously, not in the aftermath of a surprise. I have intentions for the money. Some of them involve you and Leslie. Some involve other things Carol and I cared about. All of them have been thought about carefully. I paused. What I wanted first, what I needed first, was this conversation. This specific one. About how we treated you, Leslie said. She said it without defensiveness. Something had shifted in her since the dining room. Not collapsed. Leslie was not a woman who collapsed, but adjusted. The recalibration that Elizabeth had done quietly at the table, Leslie was doing now, in the living room, more visibly, with the particular quality of a person who is intelligent enough to be genuinely changed by new information rather than simply managing it. "I owe you an apology," she said. She looked at me directly. "Not for not knowing about the money. I couldn't have known what you didn't tell me. But for how I've been in this house. For treating it like it was something to politely endure rather than somewhere I was actually welcome." She paused. "I think I've been making assumptions about what mattered and what didn't. And you've been my father-in-law for 4 years, and I don't actually know you very well. And I think that's partly your reserve, but it's mostly my failure of attention." The honesty of it surprised me. Leslie was proud. I had always known that, and pride and genuine self-examination don't always coexist comfortably. What she was doing in this moment required something real. "Thank you," I said. "That matters." "What can I do?" she said. "The same thing I asked Lucas," I said. "Come back. Not because I have $10 million. Come back the way you'd come back if I had nothing. Because that version of this family, the one where you're here because you want to be, not because there's a number attached, is the only version I'm interested in." Leslie held my gaze. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Mr. ZAHA." "ZAHA," I said. "You can call me ZAHA." She almost smiled. "Okay, ZAHA." Lucas exhaled, the long, settling exhale of a man who has been holding something since 2 o'clock and is now finally putting it down. He looked at me with the eyes of his 12-year-old self, the ones that came out when things were real. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, "for the ways I've been absent. For assuming you were fine because you always seemed fine." "I was fine," I said. "And I was also 68 years old and would have benefited from more presence." "Both things are true." "I know. Your mother would have told you," I said. "She would have called you and said, 'Lucas, your father isn't saying anything, but you need to go see him.' She was the person who watched the real things. I have missed her being that person." Lucas's face did something complicated. "I've missed her being that person too," he said. "I think I've been using her absence as a reason not to look closely. Because looking closely means seeing she's not there." The late Easter light was gold in the windows. The house was quiet in the way that houses go quiet after the noise of a meal has settled. Elizabeth was still in the window chair, still in her witness posture, and I glanced at her. "I'm glad you came for Easter," I said. She smiled, the warm, surprised smile again. "I'm glad Lucas invited me." "You're an IP attorney," I said. "Are you any good?" She raised an eyebrow. "I'm excellent." "Good," I said. "Because I have some ongoing royalty questions I've been meaning to address, and my current arrangement could use a second set of expert eyes." She looked at me for a moment, reading the offer. "I'd be happy to take a look," she said. "Good." I stood up. "There's more pie." Drop a comment below right now. Did Leslie's apology feel real to you? Do you think people can genuinely change when they find out they were wrong? Tell me what you think, because what comes next, the conversation about the money and what I decided to do with it, is where this story finds its real meaning. 2 weeks after Easter, Lucas drove to Knoxville alone. Not with Leslie. This was his choice, and he told me when he called to arrange the visit that he wanted to come by himself first. He said he had been thinking since Easter, which I believed, because Lucas, when he is genuinely thinking about something, becomes slightly less talkative on the phone, a register shift I had learned to read over 38 years of knowing him. He arrived on a Saturday morning in late April, when the dogwoods along my street were doing the spectacular, brief thing they do for 2 weeks every year, and he sat in my kitchen with coffee and looked like a man who had prepared for a conversation and was now making sure he started it correctly. "I talked to a therapist," he said. "Twice. Since Easter." This surprised me enough that I put my mug down. "Leslie suggested it," he said. "She said she thought some of what came up at Easter, about Mom, about presents, about the ways I've been avoiding things. She said she thought I might benefit from talking to someone about it." "Leslie suggested that," I said. "Yeah." He half smiled. She's been different since Easter. More honest with me about stuff she'd been managing quietly. It's been a little uncomfortable, and also better." He looked at his coffee. "I think Elizabeth's visit was good for both of us, actually. Having someone outside the dynamic ask the question that was already in the room. That's often how it works," I said. "Dad," he said, getting to it, "I want to understand the decision. Not the money itself. I mean, I have questions about that too, but first I want to understand why you waited." What you were watching for. I thought about how to answer this in a way that was honest without being a reckoning. Lucas didn't need a reckoning. He needed a conversation between equals. When your mother was alive, I said, she was the one who held the relational intelligence of this family. She knew how everyone was really doing. She knew when you needed to be checked on and when you needed to be left alone, and she knew the difference between Leslie being reserved and Leslie being dismissive, and she managed those observations with a grace I never had. I paused. When she died, I lost the interpreter. I was left reading the signals directly, without her translation, and what I read, over the following years, concerned me. What concerned you? I felt, I said carefully, that I was being maintained rather than loved. Does that distinction make sense to you? He thought about it. Yeah, he said slowly. Yeah, it does. The calls on Sunday. The holidays. The appropriate level of engagement from an appropriate distance. All technically present, but the kind of present that is managed, that has a quality of obligation rather than desire. I held his gaze, and when the royalty payment came in, I had a moment of clarity about what I did and didn't want to do with it. The first thing I didn't want to do was announce it and watch the relationship change for the wrong reasons. Because then you'd never know, he said, whether the change was genuine. Correct. He stopped. Started again. That's also pretty lonely, Dad. Sitting with $10 million and not being able to tell your son because you're not sure how he'll behave. Yes, I said. It was. The directness of his response, the willingness to name the loneliness rather than explain it away, was new. Therapy's short work, I thought. I've been treating our relationship like a maintenance item, he said. Sunday calls and holidays. Telling myself that was presence. He shook his head. It wasn't. No, I said. But it's also not irreparable. He looked up. You drove here alone, I said. On a Saturday in April when you could have been doing any number of other things. That's not maintenance. That's showing up. He was quiet for a moment. I want to do more of it. Then do more of it, I said. It doesn't require a plan. It just requires choosing it. We sat for a moment in the comfortable silence of a conversation that has reached something true and is letting it settle. Tell me about the money, he said then. What you're thinking. What you want to do. I had been thinking about this for 14 months, and I had the clarity that 14 months of thinking produces. I laid it out for him, not as a directive, not as a document to be accepted or negotiated, but as a conversation between a father and his son about what a life's work was worth and what a man wanted to do with it. The charitable commitments I had already made, the hospice, the scholarship fund, the children's hospital, I had made in Carol's honor, and they were made. Non-negotiable, and also not up for discussion. They were already done. The remainder was divided, in my thinking, into 3 parts. The first part was a trust, structured, with Howard Briggs's guidance, to provide for Lucas and future generations in a way that did not create the particular derangement that inherited money creates when it arrives without structure or expectation. Not an unconditional inheritance. A trust with provisions that tied meaningful distributions to engagement, not financial performance, not career metrics, but the simpler human metric of presence. Evidence of an active, attentive relationship. Lucas listened to this carefully. You're asking me to earn it, he said. I'm asking you to do what you were already supposed to do, I said, which is to be in this relationship. The trust is not a reward for showing up. It's a reflection of what the relationship already looks like when it's healthy. If the relationship is healthy, the trust provisions are invisible. He sat with this. And if the relationship isn't, then the trust is the least of our problems, I said. He nodded slowly. What's the second part? The second part was Carol. I explained that a significant portion, I gave him the number, was to be placed in a foundation in Carol's name, focused on hospice care funding in the region. Carol had spent her last months in a facility whose staff had given her a quality of dignity and comfort that I thought about every day, and I wanted that kind of care to be available to people whose families could not otherwise afford it. This was the thing Carol would have used the money for. I was using it for her. Lucas's eyes went wet. He didn't pursue it. He pressed his lips together and looked at the window for a moment. The way he handled emotion in public, the way he had handled it since he was a teenager. She'd love that, he said. I know, I said. She'd also love that you kept it a secret for 14 months just to watch how people behaved, he added. And then he laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, the Lucas at his best laugh that he shared with Carol. I laughed too, because he was right. Carol would have found it equal parts exasperating and exactly correct. The third part, I told him, was the part one wanted to discuss together. Not decided yet. A portion that I had set aside for the living, for Lucas, for Leslie, for whatever future might come, but whose specific shape I did not want to determine alone. I had spent 14 months being alone with information that should have been shared, and the third part was my acknowledgement that the best decisions, the ones that actually reflect what a life meant, are made in conversation. You want to decide together, he said. I want to decide with my son, I said. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the dogwoods were moving in the April wind, the white blossoms turning in slow, light-catching rotations. There's something I need to tell you, Lucas said. Something Leslie and I have been sitting with. I waited. We've been trying to have a child, he said. For 2 years. It hasn't been. It's been difficult. We're in the middle of a process that might work or might not. And it's been. He stopped. The control was effortful. It's been really hard, Dad. And we haven't talked about it with anyone because it felt like the kind of thing you manage privately until there's something to say. I thought about all the Sunday calls, about all the conversations about work and holidays and the business of life, moving on the surface while this real and heavy thing, was being managed privately and alone. You should have told me, I said. I know, he said. I know. I've been doing the same thing to you that you've been doing to me. Protecting each other from the real stuff. He looked at me. We're a pretty bad pair. We're a pair that's learning, I said. Yeah. He exhaled. Yeah. I reached across the kitchen table and put my hand on my son's arm. The gesture of a father, the oldest and most specific one, the one that has never required explanation. Whatever happens with the process, I said, you are not doing it alone anymore. That stops today. He put his hand over mine, and we sat like that at my kitchen table while the dogwoods moved in the April wind outside, and I felt the specific warmth of something that had been in the wrong shape for years finally finding the shape it was supposed to be in. The money was part of the story, but it was never the whole of it. The money was the thing that had been sitting in an account for 14 months, generating a clarity about what actually mattered. What actually mattered was this table, this kitchen, this man who was my son, and who was in pain he had been carrying alone, and who had driven to Knoxville on a Saturday in April to sit with his father and be honest. Carol had been gone for 6 years. She had taken the relational intelligence of this family with her when she went, and we had been navigating without it, all of us, in our separate private ways. It was time, I thought, to start building it back. This is the part of the story where I need your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Did the third part of the money surprise you? What do you think a parent owes a child, and what does a child owe a parent? Tell me, because what happened when Leslie came to the next visit, and what she said to me alone, in this kitchen, is the part that finally closed everything that had been open. Leslie came the following Saturday, not with Lucas, alone, which surprised me when she called on Thursday to ask if she could visit on Saturday morning. She said Lucas knew she was coming, and that she had something she wanted to say to me without him in the room, not because it was a secret from him, but because it was something she needed to do for herself, and she needed to do it directly. I told her to come. I bought coffee cake from the bakery on Maple Street, because it seemed like a coffee cake kind of conversation. She arrived at 9:30, in jeans and a simple top, her hair down. Not the Leslie who arrived at holidays in the curated presentation of a woman managing an impression, but a different version. Quieter in the body. Less arranged. She sat at the kitchen table, and I poured coffee and cut the cake, and I let her begin. I've been thinking about what you said, she started. About being tolerated rather than valued. About this house. You don't have to, I began. I want to, she said. Please. I nodded. I let her. I grew up in a family where everything was legible, she said. Every marker of success was visible, and everything that was visible was measured. Nice house, good school, right car, right job. My parents they were good people, but the measuring never stopped. And I absorbed it. I measure things. I do it automatically, the way you do things that were taught to you so young you can't remember learning them. She looked at her coffee cup. When I met Lucas's family, when I came into this house for the first time, I measured it. I measured it against the scale I'd grown up with, and I found it quieter than I expected, more modest than I expected, and I made an assumption. That it reflected the person, I said. That it reflected the person, she agreed. And then I I built my relationship with you on that assumption, which meant I never really looked. I never asked the questions that would have shown me who you actually were. She looked up. I didn't ask because I thought I already knew. That's an embarrassing thing to admit. It's an honest one, I said. I've been asking Lucas questions this past 2 weeks, she said. About you. About your career. About what you built. About Carol. And I realized, I have been married to your son for 4 years, and I knew almost nothing about his father that wasn't surface. She shook her head. That's not just a failure of perception. That's a failure of relationship. I didn't invest in knowing you, and the reason I didn't was because I had decided, without any real information, that the investment didn't have a sufficient return. The bluntness of it, the willingness to name the transaction beneath the behavior, was characteristic of Leslie, and I found it more disarming than a softer self-examination would have been. I'm telling you this, she continued, because I want you to know that my apology at Easter was real. It wasn't because of the money. I mean, I'd be lying if I said the revelation didn't clarify things. It would be ridiculous to pretend otherwise. But what it clarified wasn't, oh, he's worth paying attention to after all. What it clarified was how wrong the measuring system was. If a man can be sitting on $10 million and I can't see it because I've decided he's not worth examining closely, then the system is broken, not the man. I looked at my daughter-in-law across the kitchen table, and I thought about Carol, who had met Leslie twice before the wedding and had said to me afterward, "She's sharp, ZAHA. She doesn't miss things. The question is whether she decides to use that for the right purposes." She was using it now. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "Lucas told me about the fertility treatments," I said. "About the past 2 years." Her expression shifted, the controlled public face giving way to something more vulnerable beneath it. "I'm sorry you've been carrying that," I said. "Both of you. I'm sorry I didn't know." She was quiet for a moment. "We didn't tell anyone," she said. It felt like something we should manage privately until there was a resolution." "I understand that instinct," I said. "I lived by that instinct for most of my adult life. It cost me things." I paused. "It cost Lucas things too, I think. He learned it from me." "Probably," she said softly. "He said something similar to me, actually. That watching you keep the royalty private for 14 months, and then seeing the reason why, it made him look at his own private managing differently." She looked at me. "I think Easter broke something open in our marriage that needed breaking." "Good breaks," I said. "Yes," she agreed. "Good breaks." I thought about what to say next, and I said the thing that was truest. "I want you to know something about the trust," I said. "The provisions I told Lucas about, the relationship requirements. I want to be clear about what they are and what they are not." She was listening. "They are not surveillance," I said. "They are not a system for evaluating whether you and Lucas have been sufficiently attentive to earn money. That would be a horrible thing to build into a family, and it is not what I built." I looked at her directly. "What I built is a reflection of what a healthy relationship between a father and a son looks like when it's actually working. Visits, real conversations, presence for things that matter. The trust doesn't reward this behavior. It simply assumes it as the baseline for a family that is doing what families are supposed to do. If we're doing that, the trust is irrelevant. The trust becomes relevant only if we stop." She absorbed this. "What I'm trying to say," I said, "is that the trust is not the point. You are the point. Lucas is the point. Whatever child you're working toward bringing into this family, that is the point. The money is the thing that Carol and I built over a lifetime of work, and what we wanted it to do was support the family. Not define it. Not govern it. Support it." I paused. "I want it to support you both. However it can. Not as leverage, not as a test, not as a reward. As a resource that exists because a family should be able to use what it has for the people it loves." Leslie's eyes were bright in a way I had not seen before. She was not a crier. She had the same controlled-in public quality that Lucas had, the same pressing together of the lips when emotion arrived. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me that clearly." "Thank you," I said, "for driving here alone on a Saturday to say what you said. That cost you something." "It did," she agreed. "But it was the right thing. And I'd rather do the right thing that costs something than the easy thing that costs more later." "Carol used to say almost exactly that," I said. Leslie looked at me. "I would have liked her," she said. "She would have liked you," I said. "She would have found you challenging and interesting, and she would have been quietly delighted when you figured yourself out." Leslie smiled. A real smile, not managed. That sounds like a fair assessment. We drank our coffee. We ate the coffee cake, which was excellent, and I said so, and Leslie said the bakery on Maple Street was very good, and she had been past it on previous visits, but never stopped. You should stop next time, I said. They have a peach muffin in the summer that is worth planning a trip around. I'll plan a trip, she said. In May, I drove to Charlotte for a weekend. Not for a holiday, not for an occasion. Lucas had called and said they were going to see a baseball game on Saturday, and would I want to come? And I said yes because I wanted to come, and because saying yes to things you want to do is, I have found, one of the more underrated forms of wisdom. We sat in the sun at the ballpark, Lucas and Leslie on either side of me, the crowd in its happy, summer-adjacent energy, the game moving in the slow and beautiful way that baseball moves. Leslie bought me a hot dog without asking, because at some point in the past 3 weeks she had learned that I liked ballpark hot dogs, which meant she had been paying attention in the specific, small way that paying attention manifests. I ate the hot dog. I watched the game. I sat between my son and my daughter-in-law in the afternoon sun, and I thought about Carol, who had loved baseball, and who would have been exactly here, exactly in this moment, with a hot dog she didn't need to be bought, because she would have bought her own, and also quietly bought mine. She was not here, and the specific, permanent weight of that was something I carried, and would always carry. But the sun was warm, and the game was good, and the people beside me were present in the way that present means something. At some point in the 7th inning, Lucas put his arm around my shoulders, the way he had when he was small, the way children are physical with their parents before they become adults and learn to be careful about it. An unguarded, unmanaged gesture. I did not comment on it. I just sat with it. Some things do not need to be named. Some things just need to be allowed to be what they are. Elizabeth called me in June. She had been reviewing the royalty agreement, not the licensing deal, which was settled, but the ongoing structure and some questions she had identified about a secondary application that the company had filed under the original patent umbrella. She had found, in her meticulous IP attorney's examination of the documents, a potential additional royalty stream that had not been properly activated. She explained it carefully, and I listened, and when she was finished I said, "Are you telling me there's more money?" "Potentially," she said. "Yes. I'd want to do a full analysis before I put a number on it." I sat with this for a moment. "Elizabeth," I said, "you came to my Easter dinner as a guest, and ended up essentially working." "I did," she agreed. In my defense, I didn't know it was going to turn into a professional situation. "It turned into more than a professional situation," I said. "You inadvertently brought my family back together." A brief silence on the line. "I asked an inconsiderate question at a dinner table," she said. "You asked an honest question," I said. "And the answer was overdue." "Well," she said, "I'm glad it worked out." "Do the analysis," I said, "and then come back to Knoxville. I'll make the ham again." She laughed, the warm, surprised laugh I had first heard across the Easter table. "That's a very good reason to come back." "The deviled eggs too," I said. "I've been practicing the yolk separation. I am 68 years old. I have spent 14 months sitting with a secret that was never meant to be a test, but became one anyway, because that is what secrets do when they live long enough. They accumulate meaning. They become the container for everything you're not saying, and eventually what's inside them says itself whether you're ready or not. At my Easter table, a woman I had never met asked a question that the room had been circling around without knowing it, and the silence that followed was the sound of 14 months of patience reaching its conclusion. What I found in the aftermath was not what I had been protecting myself from. I had been braced for the transaction, for the way money changes things, for the recalibration of attention that follows the announcement of a significant number. And that recalibration happened. Honestly, I would not pretend it didn't. Numbers are real and their effect on people is real. But what I had not fully anticipated was that the revelation could also function as a kind of mirror. That looking into a mirror and finding your own measurement system broken is, for certain kinds of people with Leslie's intelligence and Lucas's capacity for honesty when properly reached, not a cause for shame, but a catalyst. A door that opens inward instead of out. Carol would have found the poetry in it. She was the one who found the poetry in things. ZAHA. She would have said, "You sat alone with $10 million for 14 months so that you could find out who your people really were. And now you know. So what are you going to do with the rest of it?" The answer, I had discovered, was the same thing you did with any well-engineered system. You maintain it. You pay attention to the load-bearing parts. You show up when it matters. You trust the structure you built to hold what it was designed to hold. And you don't wait 14 more months to tell the people you love the important things. You tell them now. If you made it to the very end of this story, I want to hear from you one final time. Drop a comment below. Tell me what this story stirred in you. Have you ever been the person who was measured and found insufficient? Have you ever been the person doing the measuring and then realized the scale was wrong? Have you ever kept a secret not to deceive but to wait for the right moment and discovered that the waiting taught you something you couldn't have learned any other way? Tell me your story. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me what it means to you, because every comment reminds me why these stories are worth telling, and the only reason to tell them is you. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.